Please do not intend to try this. The content of this video is solely based on past human experiences and may vary according to a person's physical or mental state at a specific moment. All the information shared are merely for educational and entertainment purposes only.
So, despite being known as the second most important organ after the brain, the heart is definitely life's most precious gift. It allows us to feel things beyond our normal senses, and literally pumps life into every corner of our body, as it devotedly beats in a continuous manner, keeping all of us alive. But as precious as it may be, not everyone is fortunate to have a healthy heart that's long-lasting. A person's heart may sometimes fail for numerous reasons, and a way was desperately needed to save these people. As a human heart basically has a limited ability of repairing itself, upon failure or any severities, the only medical solution left to save it is literally to replace it. Therefore, in the 20th century, heart transplant was gradually brought to light in the medical space. And through time, as technology advanced, more and more successful cases have started to surface, prolonging the lives of many unfortunates. So what does it feel like to undergo a heart transplant? And what is it really like to actually live on with someone else's heart? Well, firstly, despite the procedure of a heart transplant only lasting for a few hours, the toughest part of it lies in the pre-phase. An awaiting patient in need of a heart basically has to be stationed in a hospital for the entire period, being readily prepared for an opportunity to arise. This is due to the fact that nobody is able to predict as of when there will be an available heart. And as the heart presents itself, there will only be a small time window for the surgeons to perform the heart transplant. Moreover, this requires a lot of testings to be done beforehand, to ensure the eligibility of these recipients while matching them with a donor. These include identifying a patient's blood type, antigens, and any underlying conditions including immunocompromising illnesses, which may compromise their chance of survival. On top of that, the donor's heart will also be thoroughly examined to confirm that it is indeed in a healthy state before the procedure may take place. Now, upon finally making the match, the surgery can now begin. As one would be fully sedated throughout the procedure, they would literally feel nothing at all. Surgeons will start by first making an incision down the patient's chest, cutting through their breastbone, separating their rib cage to expose the heart. Then, while they carefully remove the damaged heart, a cardiopulmonary bypass machine is used to take over the heart's function, allowing blood to be continuously pushed through the patient's circulatory system. When the old heart is removed, the surgeons will then sew the donor's heart into place. This is an incredible precise process, where each blood vessel and artery would be carefully attached to avoid leaks. And as the new heart is fully attached, the bypass machine will now be turned off, allowing blood to flow into the aorta. Doctors will start to carefully monitor the new heart. This is vital, as the heart needs to be beating on its own before finally sewing the patient back up. At this point, although the transplant procedure is completed, the new heart is still not considered to be fully intact. This is due to surgeons not having the ability to directly connect the heart to a patient's nervous system. Hence, time is needed for the new heart to be fully innervated in the recipient's body. This may sometimes take up to years, depending on the person. Now, a person will always feel somewhat tired and sore for weeks after the surgery. This follows by brief and sharp pains on either side of one's chest, and mild aches all around. There may even be mild swelling on the area of incision. But this all gradually disappears after 4 to 6 weeks into recovery. And after 3 to 4 months, a person would most likely be able to carry out their usual activities without a problem. But that being said, within the 3 to 4 months period, it's best if the patient doesn't do any heavy liftings or extreme activities. During this period, immunosuppressive drugs along with others will also be prescribed to help manage the risk of rejections. However, these drugs may also leave a patient open into contracting dangerous infections. Therefore, constant monitoring and testing will be carried out as a balanced measure. And as described by patients after the transplants, at this stage, one would now be able to feel a stronger circulation compared to before, removing most of the problems they have had before the transplant. Although most will start to feel a sense of rebirth at this point, the hassle somewhat remains. One will still have to undergo heart biopsies and echocardiograms every week at initial stages, followed by every 2 weeks, and every month, and then every quarter. This may last for up to 2 to 3 years, until doctors finally confirm that the risk of rejection have dramatically declined. It is only then, the patient is free again. Though so, it's not guaranteed that a heart transplant will always work out. Most heart transplants on average do prolong a person's life by an estimate of 5 to 20 years, given the person's condition. But some just aren't as lucky, resulting in multiple complications and death a while later after their transplants. According to medical experts, there is a possibility of one's artery walls actually thickening and hardening after a heart transplant. This will lead to what's known as cardiac allograft vasculopathy, causing difficulties in blood circulation through a person's heart. Similar to a rejection, it can cause heart attacks, heart failures, heart arrhythmias, or even sudden cardiac deaths. In 2022, the first ever case of a human heart transplant using a heart from a genetically modified pig was performed. Suffering from terminal heart disease, David Bennett acknowledged and agreed to the procedure, knowing that it was a shot in the dark. Upon David's consent, the procedure was carried out. As the doctors successfully replaced David's heart, no signs of rejection were shown in the initial stages. Even until day 45 or 50, he was doing pretty well, despite having infectious episodes in between. But unfortunately, as it progresses on, the doctors started having difficulties in finding a balance between his immunosuppression and controlling his infection. This quickly then led on to David suffering from multiple organ failures, and finally dying about 2 months after the surgery. Although it's sad that there was no miracle in David's case, the results of those investigations has brought forth many new understandings to the medical space, leading the medical industry another step closer towards a revolutionary breakthrough. Now, what does it really feel like living with someone else's heart? According to past medical reports, although most heart transplant patients were able to live their lives normally without feeling any different, there are a handful who have had unexplainable experiences. There was an 8-year-old girl who had received a heart from a 10-year-old murdered victim. Apparently after the transplant, she began having recurring nightmares on the murder scene. Being skeptical, her parents then brought her to a psychiatrist for consultation. And after a few sessions, the psychiatrist quickly concluded that what she was witnessing could actually be physical incidents, as she was able to clearly describe what she saw. It was then, the family decided to call the police and notified them on what their daughter was experiencing. And upon providing detailed description on the girl's dreams, the police were able to find and convict the man who committed the murder, further proving what she saw to be real. In 1995, due to being at risk of congestive heart failure, Sonny Graham underwent a heart transplant surgery, replacing his with the heart of a 33-year-old suicide victim, Terry, who had shot himself. Being thankful to have received the heart, Sonny then started to write letters to the donor's family. And as they got in touch, Sonny met Cheryl, the donor's wife, who was 28 at that time. He somehow felt an immediate connection towards her, and this had led on to them getting married much later and having kids of their own. But shockingly, after 12 years from his heart transplant, Sonny was then reported to have killed himself the exact same way that Terry had, with a shotgun through his throat. Although the reasons to his suicide were not disclosed, it baffles one to think if it had any relation at all to do with Terry's heart. Next, would be the story of a 47-year-old white male, who works as a foundry worker. Upon receiving the heart from a 17-year-old black male student, the 47-year-old foundry worker had started to develop a fascination for classical music. But likewise, being skeptical, he was able to convince himself that there were no logical reason to it being whatsoever related to his new heart, thinking a black teen would have been more likely into rap music instead. But it was later, that the foundry worker came to find out that the 17-year-old donor had actually loved classical music, and even died hugging his violin while on the way to his violin class. The 47-year-old then understood, and embraced his newfound taste for classical music ever since. So having said all that, do you think a person's heart somewhat holds the key to parts of our personality? And as it's transferred over, does it connect a bridge between the donor and the recipient, allowing for certain memories or feelings to be brought through? Do leave your thoughts in the comments. As medical experts start to further understand the human body, we may very well someday be able to answer these questions that baffles most of us. But until then, stay safe, my friends. And if you like the content, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe, as it'll greatly help us in growing our channel, allowing us to provide you with more constructive content in the future. See you next time.